Most boys liked cars, so when they graduated from high school, they would more or less beg their parents to buy them a car to show off. But girls were different. Sometimes they only learned to drive for credits. For example, SH20 Clive didn't have a car. Fortunately, her home was not far from the school. It only took her 10 minutes to walk there every day, so it was convenient. But today she wanted to treat Jiang Hai to a meal. There weren't any good restaurants near the school, so they had to take Jiang Hai's car to go to town. After the two of them greeted the guard, they got into Jiang Hai's car. From here it could be seen that Jiang Hai was really dull. Usually, in this kind of situation, the man would be very gentlemanly and open the door for the woman, but Jiang Hai just got into the driver's seat. This made SH20 Clive look at Jiang Hai with some confusion. This Jiang Hai is a bit interesting. Seeing that SH20 Clive had already gotten into the car, Jiang Hai smiled and asked her, "Where are we going?" Hearing Jiang Hai's question, SH20 Clive thought for a while and decided to take Jiang Hai to eat a good meal. "Let's go eat steak. I know a French restaurant in town that is quite good." Hearing that they were going to eat French food, Jiang Hai calculated in his mind. French food was known as the most gorgeous and also the most expensive food in the world. Jiang Hai had wanted to eat there before he became rich, but after he became rich he really didn't eat it. This was because French food was famous for its foie gras and snails, but Jiang Hai didn't like to eat either. As for steak, the French preferred to use the outer rib to make steak. For Jiang Hai, the outer rib was a bit fat. Compared to outer rib, he preferred to eat tenderloin, eye meat, and upper rib, which were all relatively thin. As for the marbled pattern, the pattern was indeed fat, but this thing almost melted after being roasted. When it entered the mouth, other than the fresh taste of butter, it didn't have the taste of fat. Moreover, even if he wanted to eat steak, he wouldn't eat it at home. Was it so easy to eat special grade A beef outside? But now, since it was Sandy who said it, Jiang Hai couldn't refuse. After all, the two were not very familiar with each other, so he just followed the host's wishes. So after asking for the way, Jiang Hai drove to the Western restaurant. On the way, the two were obviously embarrassed because Jiang Hai was a taciturn person. He wouldn't take the initiative to find a topic to chat with a girl, otherwise he wouldn't be as lonely as he was now. SH20 Clive, although an American girl, was a girl after all. Moreover, she and Jiang Hai weren't very familiar with each other. Today was only the third time they met, so there was nothing to talk about. For a while, the atmosphere in the car was very strange, but fortunately Jiang Hai's driving skills were still very good after being optimized. Chapter 123. I really don't understand. It's up to you. To be honest, this is my first time eating French food. I don't know what's so good about it. If he understood, he understood. If he didn't understand, he didn't understand. Jiang Hai's biggest advantage was his confidence. In front of women, if he didn't understand, then he wouldn't pretend. So after looking around, he smacked his teeth. He handed the menu back and said with a helpless expression. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, SH20 Clive was stunned for a moment, because in her opinion, a rich person like Jiang Hai should pursue quality of life, so she brought Jiang Hai to eat French food. But unexpectedly, Jiang Hai hasn't eaten French food before, which made Sandy a little dumbfounded. Well, I hope you will like what we order later. Give us 2 sets. After taking a look at the menu, SH20 Clive looked at it and said, "Is it set A, set B, or set C?" Hearing Sandy's words, the waiter asked, "Set B." After looking at the menu, SH20 Clive thought for a moment and said, "The so-called set A, B, and C are also particular here. Set A is commonly known as the traditional set, with a total of 13 dishes. The first is frozen appetizer, the second is soup, the third is hot appetizer, the fourth is fish, the fifth is main dish, the sixth is hot appetizer, the seventh is cold appetizer, the eighth is snow, the ninth is barbecue or salad, the 10th is vegetables, the 11th is dessert, the 12th is salty, and the 13th is dessert. Generally speaking, this is a very formal banquet, only then will there be so many rules." Obviously, Jiang Hai didn't have the patience to wait for him to serve 13 dishes. It was precisely because of this that Xanthi ordered the B-set meal. The B-set meal consisted of 5 dishes, a frozen appetizer, a soup, a hot appetizer, a main dish, and a dessert. In addition, there was also the C-set meal, which consisted of an appetizer, a main dish, and a dessert. For the frozen appetizer, SH20 Clive chose tuna salad. Of course, it is estimated that each person can only get a few slices of tuna. For the soup, she chose cream of mushroom soup. After all, this is the most famous French dish. For the hot appetizer, she chose French stewed potatoes, and for the dessert, she wants strawberry crepe. But when it comes to the main dish, she hesitated. What do you recommend today? Sandy is not in a hurry. After hesitating for a long time, she still can't make a decision, so she raised her head and asked the waiter in front of her. Today's recommendation is red wine stewed beef. We just received the new Burgundy red wine from France this morning. You two can try it. Hearing the waiter's words, Sh20 Clive nodded with satisfaction. That's it. You can serve it now. After she confirmed that she wants this, the waiter also bowed respectfully and went to tell the kitchen to serve the dishes. After he left, Jiang Hai looked at Sh20 Clive. Therefore, his cheerful side would only face people he is familiar with, not strangers. He and Sandy should be considered strangers, but he had no choice. He hadn't chatted with people of his age for a long time. In the manor there were only 2 people of his age. Halamon couldn't chat with him. Although Bale would chat with him sometimes, he had to work most of the time. The only people who could chat with him and have free time to chat with him were Philip's 2 sons. But they just came here to celebrate the festival. After Christmas and New Year they would leave. Once they left, Jiang Hai would have nothing to do. After holding back for a few days today, when he heard Sandy aroused his desire to talk, he also began to talk non-stop. As for Sandy, she also liked to listen to Jiang Hai, because she thought Jiang Hai's words were very interesting and simple. He didn't sound like those rich playboys who bragged all day long. Although he was rich, his words were very close to life. This made Xanthi have a good impression of Jiang Hai. In addition, Jiang Hai had helped her school solve their money problem, so she was grateful to him. In addition to this good impression of him, further development could only be discussed in the future. But at least for now, she was very willing to chat with Jiang Hai. Teachers were actually very talkative, so the more they talked, the happier they were. Even after the dishes were served, the 2 of them were still eating and chatting. In fact, this was somewhat impolite in Western countries. It was just like the request of the elderly in China. They did not talk while eating and sleeping. However, the 2 of them were of the same age, so no one cared about this. As the 2 talked, Sh20 Clive realized that Jiang Hai was really an interesting man. Maybe it was because he didn't work outside after leaving school, but sometimes Jiang Hai seemed a bit naive. He didn't talk and do things like an adult but more like a big boy. Listening to his complaints, listening to his jokes, and listening to him showing off the fish and beef in his manner, Sh20 Clive suddenly felt that this guy was really interesting. He wasn't as pretentious as she thought, nor was he crazy. Instead, he was a bit lively. Whether this kind of person was suitable to be a boyfriend was another matter, but it wouldn't be bad if he could be a friend. The beef here is cooked well, but the beef itself is far inferior to mine. When you have time, you can come to my place to play. Let's not talk about other things, but I have more than enough special grade A beef. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't notice any changes in Sh20 Clive. He only used his fork to stab at the burgundy red wine stewed beef in front of him as he spoke to her with a smile. Okay, then I want to try the taste of special grade A beef. I haven't had it in a while. Let me tell you, the last time I had special grade A beef, my dad was still the head chef here. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, everyone here nodded happily to Jiang Hai and then walked back to their rooms. As for Jiang Hai, he walked back to his villa. However, after returning, he did not go directly to the house. Instead, he went to the warehouse first. He remembered that he invited Shenty Clive to come over to eat beef tomorrow. He did not want to run out of beef by then. Fortunately, there is still beef. Walking into the warehouse's freezer, Jiang Hai saw a few large pieces of beef hanging in the air. These beef were left behind by robins and the others after they killed the cows. As far as the current situation was concerned, it was still in a very fresh state. Very good. Besides beef, is there anything else? This was the first time Jiang Hai invited a girl to his house for dinner. Even if his reaction was half a beat slower, he was still a little slow. He did not particularly understand what this meant. In fact, he did not think about it that way. The reason why he was here to see what else was in the house was entirely because of the genes of an otaku. If he wanted to treat someone to a meal, he would not treat them. If he wanted to treat someone to a meal, naturally he would eat well, especially when the other party was a beauty. After checking the beef and confirming that it was superior grade, Jiang Hai looked at other things. But after looking at it, Jiang Hai couldn't help but frown. This was because the ingredients in his warehouse, in addition to the special grade beef, there were only some prawns and crabs left. After the lobsters were caught yesterday, they were eliminated by him and the people in the manor. The remaining prawns and crabs, to be honest, the people in the United States almost didn't eat crabs. They only ate the legs of crabs. They didn't have much interest in the hard-to-get meat, especially the fishermen. They didn't like prawns and crabs, which were more troublesome to eat. Therefore, the only person who liked to eat them here was Jiang Hai. But on the contrary, compared to prawns and crabs, Lobsters are something they like to eat very much. These guys will also pick delicious things to eat. I'm the owner of a fishery. I treat a girl to a meal, but I don't even have lobsters. It's really embarrassing. Scratching his head, Jiang Hai muttered in a low voice. After thinking for a while, he felt that he should go to the sea tonight to catch a few. After learning that the sharks under the sea were not a threat, Jiang Hai's courage increased a lot. But thinking about it, the sky is dark outside and the water is cold. If I go into the water to catch lobsters, I'm crazy. In fact, the best way was to let Ai Dehua and the others bring back some lobsters when they patrolled tomorrow. However, Chinese people, especially Chinese otakus, had a common problem. They didn't like to ask others to help them. There was no need to ask others to help them do things that they could do. Chapter 125. Hey, sorry to keep you waiting. Shenty Clive looked at the F-650 parked on the road. She walked out of the small villa behind her and smiled at Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai also opened the door and jumped out of the car. It's fine, I just arrived. Jiang Hai immediately waved his hand and said. He didn't care about the awkwardness of playing Plants vs. Zombies on his phone. His face was filled with a bright smile. At the same time, he looked at Shenty Clive in front of him. He had to admit that Shenty Clive was very beautiful today. Shenty Clive was originally of mixed race. She had introduced herself before. Her father was a white man from the United States, and her mother was Venezuelan. Venezuela was the country that produced the most beautiful women in the world. Her mother was also very beautiful in Venezuela. However, women who were too beautiful sometimes couldn't be kept if they didn't have enough money. That was why she ran away with the boss of the Western restaurant where her father worked. Her father was disheartened and brought her back to his hometown, Boston. He became a chef and found her a stepmother. That stepmother was her current sister, Karma Cliff's mother. Jiang Hai originally thought it was strange. Although the two sisters looked similar, their hair and skin color were different. Today, Shenty Clive deliberately dressed up. Her long brown hair was pulled straight and buttoned. Because she inherited her father's genes, she was very tall, about 1.75 meters tall. She had a well-proportioned body, especially her two long legs. According to Jiang Hai's estimation, her legs were about 1 meters long. What she inherited from her mother was her skin texture and delicate facial features. Her skin was not as thick as that of a white person. Instead, it was as delicate as that of an Asian. Her facial features were also much more delicate than that of an orthodox white person. It made people feel very comfortable looking at her. Shenty Clive looked at Jiang Hai's smile and said embarrassedly, Okay, I didn't expect you to wake up so early. This weather is perfect for sleeping in. Haha, to apologize, I'll treat you to breakfast. Let's go. When she sent the message to Jiang Hai, she didn't know that Jiang Hai was here. She had just woken up. The primary school in the United States was a free-range model. It was more to stimulate the children's nature. It was more like an extension of kindergarten than a primary school. There weren't many cultural classes. What the fifth graders learned in China were what the second graders learned in the United States. The children didn't learn much, so naturally they didn't have much homework. More homework, such as the kind of outdoor activities, watching the diary and so on, the children's burden was lighter. Naturally, the teachers weren't too busy, not to mention that it was a holiday. Well, for the United Kingdom it might be very heavy. After looking at Bunker Mountain, which was actually a pillar, they went to the Old North Church, which was known as the oldest church in Boston. They also went to Farnell Hall, which was known as the Cradle of Freedom, and took a look at the Boston Library from the outside. However, they could not enter this place. Jiang Hai and the others were not students from this area. Moreover, he did not have the leisure to read books. Originally, Shenty Clive wanted to take Jiang Hai to see the famous Granella Cemetery. However, Jiang Hai rejected. Wuxia people and the United States people had different thoughts. If they had nothing to do, why would they want to see a cemetery? The atmosphere was gloomy. Under normal circumstances, if it was not a New Year, a festival, or a Memorial Day, the Chinese would rarely go to a cemetery. Although they were not afraid of their loved ones buried there, they would still have some doubts. Some people would say that this was a religion or superstition. However, these things were passed down from the older generation. You could choose not to believe it, but you could not ignore it. It was like some hidden rules in society. There were no written rules, but if you did not play by the rules of the game, you might be the unlucky one in the end. However, when Mu Di was mentioned, Jiang Hai could not help but think of his parents. Because he did not have much money back then, his parents did not buy a cemetery. Instead, they placed it at the crematorium. Of course, now that he had money, he could buy a cemetery. However, moving a cemetery was not something that could be done casually. One of the conditions was that they had to wait for 3 years before they could move. Now that his father had enough, his mother still needed 1 more year. Now he was a little hesitant. Should he go back to take a look during the new year?